Good evening. I'm Yalda Hakim. We begin the programme tonight with the latest from Belfast, where vehicles have been set on fire after what the Prime Minister Keir Starmer described as a horrific and abhorrent stabbing attack. Sky News has decided not to broadcast the attack itself, but we can show you this still image from the video. The victim, a man in his 40s, was pinned down in the street and suffered wounds to his eyes, back and face. A man from Sudan who was granted leave to remain in the UK in 2023 has been arrested. We'll bring you more from our correspondents on the ground throughout the hour. And we'll take you back to Belfast in a few minutes' time. But first, and for now, for not what I want to focus on, the tournament described as a World Cup for them and not for us. It's due to kick off in 48 hours. And was always going to be tainted by the politics of its host. Take this man, 34-year-old Omar Artan. He was named Africa's Referee of the Year in 2025. He had a valid visa, but was detained and questioned for 11 hours before being refused entry. Also affected, the Iranian national team. They've had to move their training camp to Mexico. Several of their officials have been barred, and they'll only be able to enter the US on the day of their match. And in both cases, the football world governing body FIFA, led by a close ally of Donald Trump, have remained silent.
Is this the spirit of football? Really? You know who I feel for? I feel for the American fans who are desperate for this. American soccer fans who are desperate for this. How embarrassed they must be. How embarrassing for them this must be. This is, you know what? This is the World Cup. This is a World Cup of chaos.
That's Ian Wright on the visa restrictions causing chaos for teams. You'll remember that at the beginning of the year, the United States banned citizens from 20 countries. Partial restrictions are in place for a further 19 nations, meaning student and other visas won't be issued. Of those 39, there are 4 countries that have qualified for the World Cup: Senegal, Ivory Coast, Haiti and Iran. So is Donald Trump's anti-immigration stance putting the at risk? We'll hear from James Matthews in Washington in a moment. But first, let's go to our Rob Harris, who joins me live now from Mexico City. And in many ways, Rob, we're now 48 hours away from the start of the World Cup, and already all of these teams that we have just talked about being affected are feeling the full force of Donald Trump's draconian laws ahead of this World Cup.
And these are all the issues that we had anticipated. They're playing out just at the time that FIFA and fans would hope the focus becomes on the football. But it is those travel bans that have become an escalating issue. At the start of the year, the Trump administration had said there would be exemptions for the sporting events coming up, including this World Cup. But that would only relate to the direct participants, the athletes, not members of the wider delegation. So with the Iranian delegation, that's why we're seeing team officials unable to potentially get into the United States. Hearing from Secretary of State Marco Rubio in the last few hours, saying that some of those people he believes have ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and that's why they're not being allowed into the US, where Iran does play its group stage matches on the West Coast. At the same time, we've got Iran complaining that they're no longer able to sell tickets to their fans. That's being presented by FIFA as an attempt to find a solution. We do understand that the issue is about dealing with financial transactions with Iran due to sanctions. So those tickets that should be designated for the Iranian team will end up on the general market, which means you could get members of the Iranian diaspora, particularly in Los Angeles, able to get into those games. Very much potentially anti-regime fans who will be able to see Iran in those matches. But Iran had planned to base themselves in Arizona. Instead, they're here in Mexico, in Tijuana, still with uncertainty about which members of the delegation will get into the country. Iran being one of those countries on the Trump travel ban list, so a complete bar on anyone from the country entering the United States, apart from those exemptions that are in place. Also, Somalia on the travel ban list, and that's why we are getting the issue with Omar Artan, the referee from Somalia, who is unable to get into the States. He says that he spent 11 hours in being questioned after flying in from Turkey at the weekend, but suddenly he believes he had his right papers, denied entry to the US. That's where the referees are based of this tournament in Miami And that's why FIFA said he would no longer referee at this World Cup. One of the top referees in the world, leading referee in Africa, no longer able to referee at this tournament, showing that FIFA has been unable to secure the position. It had long said that everyone will be welcome at this World Cup. The message from Gianni Infantino last year, he was actually speaking in Africa, saying that there are misconceptions about people not getting in for this World Cup, but that will not be the case. Ultimately, some are questioning why FIFA has not been able to use its leverage in the White House to secure wide exemptions, but ultimately, they say they can't do anything. They can't impose visa requirements on countries hosting tournaments, even though perhaps that has been able to be applied in the past. But it means that this World Cup is starting in 2 days against the backdrop of the implications of the Trump administration's travel bans and questions about how welcoming this World Cup will be when FIFA wants this World Cup, in its own words, to unite the world.
Yeah, very much so. And Rob, I guess, I wonder, are fans and are people pointing the finger of blame at the Trump administration, FIFA, because FIFA sort of put its hands up and said, look, it's up to the host country to issue visas. It's not really our call. But are fans angry at FIFA for not doing enough?
It's interesting on this because some countries do complain when FIFA tries to impose restrictions. You can get tax restrictions that it tries to secure those exemptions, and countries can actually find it quite problematic. We've seen some cities like Chicago withdraw from hosting matches or planning to even go into the running because they didn't want to have to cede so much ground to FIFA. But we are seeing fans, I think, globally start to question how FIFA's ended up in this position when it has been so cosy with the Trump administration. Perhaps it's been unable to use that leverage to prevent this position playing out right on the World Cup beginning, where it's becoming so political. But ultimately, the Trump administration is reflecting its long-standing position, which is protecting America's borders, securing America's borders from people it does not want coming into the country. And there's been a lot of time to see this play out. It was in the first administration imposing these very strict entry bans into the United States, but ultimately everything that perhaps had been feared about these issues playing out right as we're preparing for the matches to begin are actually manifesting, and it's causing all sorts of issues for the fans who can't even make it into this World Cup. You've got Haiti, who are playing Scotland in their opening match. Well, they can't have any fans coming into the country. Iran can't have fans coming in. And of course, against the backdrop of this war launched by the United States alongside Israel on Iran in February, a quite unprecedented situation where a World Cup host launching a war on one of the participating nations just a few months beforehand. So we're seeing the consequence of that and the heightened tensions that will play out as we wait for this World Cup to begin.
Rob, thank you so much for that update. No doubt we'll be speaking to you a lot in the coming days and weeks. Let's go to our US correspondent, James Matthews. And James, just listening there to Rob talking about when some of these bans came into effect, and frankly now the impact of these travel bans on people from certain countries being felt by the World Cup, which frankly is supposed to unite countries and players from across the world. Just 2 days out, we're starting to see some of these issues overshadowing, this massive event being hosted by the United States and of course, North America as a whole, but the United States in general, focused on these travel bans.
Yeah, hi, Yalda. I suppose we were always going to see the complications when the rubber started to hit the road, and that's the stage we are at right now. There is a man who is in charge of all things World Cup. He is Andrew Giuliani, son of Rudy Giuliani, former New York mayor, lawyer for President Trump. Andrew Giuliani, a big friend of President Trump himself. I've just been to a briefing with him, which was interesting for a number of reasons. He talked security, talked about the threat of drones on stadiums, actually, and talked about the measures that are being taken to guard against that drone attack in a football stadium. He insisted it would be called soccer. That was still his word. Said that the British invented the game, the beautiful game, in 1913. Of course, Yalda, he's several hundred years out on that one, so not great on some of the detail. But I wanted to ask him about the talking point of the day. A World Cup that, in the eyes of some, is underpinned or has racial discrimination running through it. And people look at the events of the past few days that Rob has been talking about as evidence of that, particularly the rejection or the non-entry of the Somalian referee into the United States. Andrew, can I ask, why did the referee Omar Atan, why was he refused entry to the United States?
Look, there are a few things we can't talk about, but what I can tell you is that anybody who's communicating with bad actors that plan harm against the United States of America are not going to be admitted entrants, and we're not going to allow a soccer tournament, no matter how big it is, to threaten Americans. What we are proud of is we're proud of the work that's been done from a visa perspective, the fact that all players, all coaches up to this point have gotten in the country. We've worked extremely hard with consular affairs, with CBP and USCIS to make that happen.
Was he in contact with bad actors, and who were these bad actors?
Again, there are some things that I can't talk about. What I can tell you is we're going to make sure that this is a safe and secure tournament, not just for American citizens and permanent residents, but all the people who legally are traveling here to the United States.
Given the people having trouble accessing this tournament and their skin colour,
how so?
Is this shaping up as a racist World Cup?
First off, explain your question, because I think the premise is false.
Swiss striker Breel Embolo, Cameroon-born, he had trouble getting into the country. Iraqi striker Ayman Hussein was detained for 7 hours.
Are in the country?
They're in the country.
They're in the country. Exactly.
They were detained.
And we've ultimately facilitated
members
that.
Of the,
I think it's very,
members
key.
of the Senegal team.
I think it's very, very key.
Members
to make
of the
sure,
Senegal team.
And they're now in the country. Is that correct?
But they were subject to intense.
So look, we are going to
some
make
would
sure
say humiliating searches at the airport.
Don't you think the most important thing about a tournament is making sure that those fans that come to the United States, all those Americans that are going to enjoy this tournament, that they actually are safe and secure? That's what I ultimately think is important. We're going to continue to focus on that.
Was a Somalian referee not allowed into the country because Donald Trump
on this one here, sir.
has a problem with Somalia? There you go, Andrew Giuliani, the man, the executive who's running this World Cup effectively in the United States, rejecting any notion that there is anything to do with racism associated with the tournament. Football, as we know, Yalda, it's a game for all people to be treated equally, and there is a serious concern that at this World Cup that doesn't apply because participants are being treated unequally.
James, thank you so much. OK, let's go back to our story in Belfast now. And as we've been reporting, protesters have gathered in Belfast, where they have set bins and buses alight. Let's just go straight to Conor Gillies. And Conor, just give us a sense of where you are and what's going on.
The tension has ramped up quite considerably since we last appeared in the last half an hour or so. We have moved 10 minutes up the road into another part of the city, and there has been quite a dramatic police moment in the last few minutes where police units came driving down here, bashing through the barriers that some of the protesters had put in place, sirens blaring, because this is the scene here. Protesters have set fire to part of the road to try and make their point as community tensions flare up here in Northern Ireland. If we spin round here in this housing estate, we have yet another fire as part of this as well. And the security intelligence from our team here on the ground is that potentially the police were coming to tackle some of the crowds that have gathered slightly further up the road here, but were diverted. So they came down here, pushing through the barriers in an attempt to clear that, and have now gone on to something potentially bigger and more significant. The protesters, though, have now reinstated the barriers here, as you can see. So this is very much continuing. And just across this city, you can hear bangs. You can smell smoke in the air here, because let's remember, there is anger here as to the events of last night that were captured on camera, broadcast for the world to see. A man pinned to the ground here in Belfast. as a knife was plunged into his body. He is still in hospital in a serious condition here in this city this evening, with wounds to his neck, his head and to his back. Looking over here again, another flare up, more smoke billowing into the sky as well. And some of the details have emerged today from the police, who are urging calm here in this city. They are saying, yes, protest is legitimate, but there is no reason to take the law into your own hands. They are on top of it when it comes to this police investigation. They have detained a man, they have detained a suspect who has now been charged in the past few hours. Details emerging about the identity of that individual. We understand him to be a Sudanese national, made a journey from Sudan to Paris a number of years ago, then Paris to Dublin, onto the island of Ireland, and then a bus journey from Dublin to here in Belfast, where he claimed asylum in 2023 and was subsequently granted leave to remain, with a visa extending, we understand, until at least 2028. Police here say there was no trace of him on the National Security Database, and there is nothing to suggest that the events of the last 24 hours are terror-related. But there is a feeling here that immigration is a problem, and that is why they are taking to the streets in the way that they are, not just in one community but in pockets of communities across the city. You might even be able to hear the pop, the bangs, the smoke continuing into the sky here. We'll keep an eye on developments as the evening progresses here in Sky News, but certainly tensions seem to be ramping up, not cooling down at this stage.
Yeah, Connor, we can see the smoke behind you. We can't hear the popping. But as you say, police are calling for calm, and they're telling people not to take matters into their own hands. But they are deeply concerned that this situation could potentially escalate. Are you starting to see more people come out as the evening goes?
Well, certainly hundreds of people have been in the locations that we have witnessed this evening. It's hard to put into quantity, to pull that together in terms of definite numbers. As a comparison, around this time last year, I was in the town of Ballymena here in Northern Ireland, covering protests that were sparked in the wake of a sexual assault on a child. And that, in comparison to this at the moment, that seemed more significant because it was more concentrated in a smaller area. Clearly, Belfast is a city, and with that comes more pockets of clashes, more pockets of potential violence, more pockets of people trying in an attempt to make their voice known. So, in pure comparative terms, when we look at the experience of Ballymena 12 months ago, this feels not as significant yet, but it's more spread out, and that will be a challenge, a policing challenge as well, given the stretch on resources here. But it all stretches back to what the PSNI, the police chief here in Northern Ireland, said, that he appealed for calm, as did the protesters, as did some other community leaders here in Northern Ireland, we need to wait and see how the next few hours pan out. Again, our presence is not particularly welcome here, so I'll hand back to you, Yalda.
Thanks so much, Connor. Really grateful for your reporting. You're looking at those images from the helicopter in the area where you can see some of those demonstrators gathering. As Connor was saying there, tensions are high at the moment as protesters gather in different communities across Belfast following that knife attack. And you're looking at those live pictures. As we reported earlier, bins have been set alight and a bus was on fire. I understand it's still on fire in the city centre. The traffic has also been blocked as people gather in other towns as well in Northern Ireland. But police have called for calm. Let's just bring in our police commentator now, Graham Wetton. Graham, thanks so much for joining us. Just give us a sense of the concern that police have in this moment, because Connor was saying, people are clearly, visibly very angry. They're not happy about the cameras being there. We can see the bins on fire, as well as a bus that was set alight. But police continue to call for calm.
Yes, they do. And I think this was a concern from the police commanders and even politicians, that this would escalate. people would use it to actually, for their own causes, set vehicles on fire, as we're seeing. It's spread literally across Belfast. So we had some aerial pictures earlier on when I was commenting, and you could see it's from one part of Belfast to the other. So the issue for police command teams there and police resources is having the resources to deal with different pockets of disorder. And as darkness starts to fall, that may well increase as the night comes on. People may feel emboldened to come out with the cover of darkness. As ever with Belfast, there's always the possibility of fireworks, or firearms, or even explosives being used during protests and disorder. We've seen that historically, so that will also be a concern for the authorities to actually deal with that if that starts to happen. Hopefully it won't, and what we see is actually what's going to transpire through the evening, but more areas of disorder, different pockets of disorder. Hopefully it won't be more numbers, but more numbers coming out onto the street will cause an issue for police commanders and their resources.
Yeah, and one of the other things that the authorities, Graham, continue to say is they do not want to see this movement weaponised, that what happened was horrific. The man has been charged with attempted murder. He is in police custody, and they are calling on these demonstrators not to take matters into their own hands.
Yes, they have, but I think as we're seeing now and events transpiring throughout the last couple of hours, they are taking it into their own hands. It is being weaponised. They're reacting to other people urging them to come out onto the street and protest. This isn't peaceful protest. You've heard the politicians saying peaceful protest will be facilitated. The police have said that they're happy and content to facilitate peaceful protest. The police are not the enemy here, and neither are the community. The only people that suffer from disorder and violence and damage like this is the actual community that this awful attack took place in. And we saw the heroics of the community last night in coming out and preventing that attack and allowing the police to detain him and then arrest and charge him earlier on today. So the only thing this is going to impact is the actual community. Police commanders will be hoping this dissipates and people start to go home and leave the area. But as you just heard from Connor, it seems like it's starting to escalate. So hopefully the police will be able to deal with any incidents of disorder and start to quell it.
Yeah, just talk us through, the sort of pockets of demonstrations that are taking place. Have police started to barricade some of these areas? How are they trying to keep it under control?
It's a very difficult and challenging situation without the whole geography of it, knowing where everybody is and where they're moving to. We've seen some of the earlier aerial images. They're clearly residential areas with lots of alleyways and roadways and pathways that they can use. Police command teams will normally, and the tactics will be to try and keep them in certain areas, but you're seeing it spread across the city centre, so that makes it really problematic to start managing your resources. And the resources are finite. You haven't got loads and loads of resources to put into the city centre. Public order trained officers and resources to come into the city centre to deal with the disorder and the damage that we're seeing. So it does become a challenge for the police commanders to actually manage different incidents, different outbreaks of disorder with sufficient resources to manage it in areas. They will try and contain it if they can and move it into certain areas or certain locations that they are more comfortable and confident in dealing with any disorder there. But that is a real challenge for them if it's spread, as we've seen earlier on, across the city centre.
Graham, we're going to keep you there and go to our correspondent, Dan Whitehead, who joins us now from a part of Belfast. And Dan, just talk us through what's going on where you are.
Are you sure you don't want to show your face?
No.
On Lower Newtonards Road for the evening here. This is the sort of the epicentre so far of some of the violence that's erupted. It's where we saw that bus set on fire earlier this evening. We've managed to get a little bit closer because the crowds now have slightly dispersed. There are still people here, though, somewhere in balaclavas. You can see now quite clearly how this started. There's a number of bins in the middle of the road, some of which are on fire. They were pushed into the road, and next to that bus, the wreckage of which you can see smouldering on the left there. And that is the remains of that large sort of double bus which was set on fire earlier this evening. Obviously, throughout today, we have been hearing the call for calm from the police, calm from politicians, and that has not materialised here. This was really the first flashpoint. I think what we're seeing at the moment is not violence in significant numbers, but it's different pockets across Belfast. So we are hearing the sort of groups of 100 or so either way in different areas of the city. On Shankill Road, we've seen police ramming through barriers, a fire there, but there isn't at the moment a significant large group of people, but look, the night is young and we'll see what happens. Hopefully, perhaps the weather, it has dried off now, but it has been quite wet throughout the evening. Hopefully that has kept people indoors. But you can see here, this is the flashpoint, look, less than 24 hours on from that horrific attack, about 1.5 miles away from where we are. This is the violence that's unfolded so far on the streets of Belfast. At the scene there, the investigation work continues. Of course, they have now charged a 30-year-old man with attempted murder and other offences, and he is going to appear in court here in Belfast at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. But the investigation work, of course, continues at a pace. And the locals around that area in the north of the city, very close to where that attack happened, you could tell it was quite an eerie atmosphere. They were quite worried. They were on their doorsteps, concerned about what might unfold tonight. The call for calm from politicians, the call for restraint and calm from police as well, obviously has not been adhered. The hope is that it doesn't get any more serious and doesn't escalate as the night draws in.
Yeah, Dan, interesting you were saying that the crowd have started to disperse where you are. I was just speaking to Connor, who's in another part of Belfast, and he said that it felt where he was that things were escalating. It's clearly that there are different pockets of protesters, and, that could cause different pockets of escalation or violence, but certainly it seems where you are, perhaps it's quietened down for now.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a city which is built on fractions and divisions in the past, and, that is what we are seeing tonight. That is what it looks like, that the police are having to deal with different areas, different sections, and little pockets, as you say, of violence erupting. So that is the difficulty at the moment. You can see there the flames increasing here on the bins next to that bus. The crowds have dispersed from this area in the east of the city for now. There's a few people still hanging around. The fire engines, actually, who were tackling that, they left a few moments ago with their sirens blazing, perhaps going to reports of yet another blaze. It does, of course, stretch the authorities thin. Look, the PSNI are first in dealing with situations in Belfast. But when it does separate and when it is fragmented across the city, it, of course, makes the challenge of policing on the streets here even more difficult. What they will be hoping is that the numbers don't swell to more than the sort of 100 or 200 in pockets that we have been seeing, because, of course, that is when more resources is needed in one area. And if that's, of course, it stretches the police resources even further. At the moment, look, it's still daylight. We are in summertime. As that night draws in, that's going to be a much more difficult challenge. Police have been gathering evidence. They will have been, from their helicopters, from their drones, from police, other police and envisioned police officers on the ground. They will have been gathering evidence for anyone committing any criminal offences this evening. The hope is that it just doesn't escalate any further.
Dan, thank you so much for that update from Belfast. Well, the knife attack has drawn reaction from across Westminster. Nigel Farage said people are right to be angry after the Northern Ireland Secretary warned against disorder on the streets. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John, one of the concerns here is that this moment is going to be weaponised, and already we're seeing some people come out and attempt to do that. But police, the authorities in Northern Ireland are sort of saying we can't let this be weaponised, and the situation needs to remain calm.
That was what the Chief Constable of Northern Ireland said when he appeared alongside the political leaders at Stormont late this afternoon. Mr Farage also talked about immigration policy, and he talked about a policy known as leave to remain, right to remain. He said that was a policy that was being dished out like Smarties, little chocolate buttons. But it really has, the events of the 24 hours have really reopened the debate about immigration policy in the UK. Now, Mr Farage, if you look at the Reform UK policy, it talks about scrapping what Reform calls the Boris of immigration from the period of 2019, and they want to scrap indefinite leave to remain and make that much harder. And of course, they've got a policy of mass deportations as well. Now, the Labour Party produced a white paper on this, a policy paper, back in November, the immigration white paper. They're talking about migrants having to wait 10 years for indefinite leave to remain. At the moment, it's 5 years. The Tory policy is very similar, building trust, it says, in their policy documents. And they talk about also a similar policy of getting rid of that, increasing that period for where you have to wait for indefinite leave to remain. The Tories talked about the right to remain in the UK has been seen as an automatic entitlement, a conveyor belt to citizenship. This was Kemi Badenoch talking when she launched that policy. And she also she's accused Labour of making it easier for illegal migrants to gain UK citizenship, not in 5 years' time now. So all the political parties, as immigration becomes a bigger issue all the time, are talking about toughening the policies on immigration, and particularly on the right to remain of people here for more. At the moment, it's after 5 years, and they're talking about 10. I should also mention that Andy Burnham, who we all expect to believe if he can, he will challenge Keir Starmer, the job of Prime Minister. He gave an interview yesterday, said, "I'll get a grip on illegal migration." And he was boasting, "I used to be an immigration minister in the Blair government. I used to oversee returns of people to other countries. We did get a grip on the system at that point." And he said the government was getting more of a grip. It needs to go further. So all the politicians are talking about toughening immigration policy, particularly making it harder for people who are here, perhaps as asylum seekers, migrants, to stay in this country. And of course, Reform UK talking about far more deportations than we're seeing already. You'll recall that the Labour government's policy is this one in, one out policy with France, which the government says is working, but the numbers are not great. And critics say that's not worked terribly well and it's very expensive.
Just briefly, John, before I go to my guest, I mean, it just highlights how fragile this issue is. When an incident like this occurs, this entire debate re-emerges. You have people out on the streets and politicians coming out, making all sorts of pledges and statements, knowing that it is a sensitive sore point for these people who are out on the streets tonight.
Well, we saw it last week with the conviction of the murderer of Henry Novak, the 18-year-old student who was killed, and in dreadful circumstances when the police were criticised, obviously, for their handling, when he said, "I've been stabbed, I can't breathe," and the policeman said, "I don't think you have, mate." And of course, that prompted Mr Farage very quickly to say the reaction should be, as he put it, pure cold rage. Now, a lot of people are unhappy with that use of the word rage, but obviously he is one who likes to make provocative statements to gain attention. There's another political party I've not mentioned, tiny party, a party with one member of parliament, that is Rupert Lowe and his Restore. They've got a very right wing, if you like, policy on migration, deportations, and so on. So yes, all of a sudden in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Novak case, and so we've seen what's happened in Belfast this week, really ramp up the issue of immigration. And I'm pretty sure that tomorrow at Prime Minister's Questions, the Prime Minister will be asked about it.
Indeed. John, as always, thank you so much. I'm joined now by Carl White, who is a Social Democratic and Labour Party councillor for Belfast City Council. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. You've been out and about speaking to members of the community. You were at the scene this morning. What are you hearing from some of the residents who witnessed this attack?
The people who witnessed the attack who I spoke to this morning are absolutely distraught. You can imagine people across Belfast waking up this morning to images of this violent, horrific and senseless attack. a knife held up to someone's head, someone's neck. And thankfully, the bravery of some local people ended the attack, and the attacker was arrested and apprehended by the police, and the victim was taken to hospital. It is interesting to hear this sudden interest from British politicians like Nigel Farage into the affairs of Northern Ireland and the intricacies of immigration and how that works in our part of the country. Because he wasn't there today. His party has no representatives in Northern Ireland. I was on the street where this happened. I spoke to witnesses. I've been busy today arranging help for those who were directly affected by this attack, while others have been ramping up far-right rhetoric to score political points.
Yes, and is that now some of the concerns of the community who are no doubt shaken by this attack, and of course those witnesses who saw what took place?
I think shaken is probably an understatement. You know, if you haven't seen this video, I urge you not to watch it because it won't leave you. I heard firsthand a description from one of the witnesses to the attack and what she described to me, I certainly will never forget. So it is absolutely horrendous. This is a city which has seen its fair share of trouble, but what has a city that's always been welcome to immigrant communities, and they've been here for decades. We're immigrants right across the world, so we understand the intricacies of this issue in a way that Mr. Farage and other right-wing politicians across Britain and the US just don't. So we've lived it and we continue to do so. People are fearful, they're frightened, they're anxious, they're scared. They're normal reactions. That's how I felt today after I left my children off to school. Where the attack happened is a couple of metres off from the school I attended as a teenager. So you can understand why we feel this issue very closely tonight. And that's why you're seeing protests across Northern Ireland, and some of them are now breaking into acts of illegality and vandalism and thuggery, which actually have nothing to do with this issue. You know, if you have strong views on immigration policy, that you know, that's fine, and you're welcome to those, and let's discuss that. What you're not entitled to do is go out and set fire to a bus or to threaten people in their homes. That's got nothing to do with the issue. And it seems to be that when it comes to this issue, that behaviour is sometimes excused. Whereas in any other policy debate that we have or disagreement, it's very clear what the boundaries are, that you're not allowed to engage in that type of behaviour. Yet when it comes to debates about immigration, it seems like this is becoming par for the course.
Yeah, Carl, just talk us through some of the unrest, because we are looking at these aerial images. We saw earlier the bus that was set alight. We know that bins have been set on fire, and there is real concern that the situation could escalate. The police continues to call for calm and is calling on the protesters not to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah, we had our Chief Constable today with the main political leaders in Northern Ireland, all of whom were in agreement and all of whom signed a statement this morning calling for that calm. Tonight across Belfast there are some disturbances. A bus has been set on fire. There are fires and incidents here and there. I was out earlier, in the area where it happened, which is very quiet. So hopefully by tomorrow the police will have got a handle on this and it will have been settled. We're actually a year to the day from similar protests in a town called, north of here called Ballymena, which ended after a couple of days. And let's be clear how they did end. People were arrested, charged, prosecuted, now have criminal records. And the instigators and the people who wind them up online and elsewhere run for the hills. They're nowhere to be seen. So, you know, my message tonight is to people, of course, your anger is understood. That's how I feel. I felt shock. I felt fear, terror, anxiety, all of those feelings when I saw those images. But I was there on the street today where it happened, trying to help the people who live there and who saw it. You should not be going out rioting. You should not be breaking the law. You should not be setting fire to buses or vehicles. You should not be trying to smash people's doors in. What you should be doing is, if you want to protest, doing so legally and ignore the far-right agitators. A minority of whom are here, but many of whom come from across Britain and the US, who wind things up and then walk away, running for the hills when trouble starts, and leave the consequences of arrests and criminal charges and prosecutions to those on the ground.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the sort of influence of social media on this, because you talked earlier about those images of the attacker, the horrific images that we saw circulating on social media. And then, you know, people being riled up on social media to take matters into their own hands, to come out onto the streets, and then the sort of violence that we're starting to see across pockets of Belfast.
Of course, yeah, we're seeing AI-generated images, sort of, protest. There's going to be protests everywhere. You know, you're seeing notifications of 25, 30, 35 protests, and of course, many of those never happen. It's almost like a hope for the best approach. Let's hope that, so we put these on social media. We hope we get retweets from prominent individuals, hoping that we get those to spread the word, and maybe some of these protests will then take place. And that is what happens. They're very disorganized. They can be peaceful, where it's people milling about, standing on the street. There's nothing coordinated about any of it. And of course, then what happens is that far-right elements and criminal elements become involved in these protests, take over the protests, and use them for their own purposes, which are criminality, thuggery, setting fire to buses. It's beyond me how setting fire to buses, public transport systems, which are used by working class people in Belfast, how on earth that contributes to the debate about immigration. It doesn't. It's got nothing to do with it. It's thuggery and criminality, and the police will, and they do here, they follow up, they prosecute, and they charge, and people end up with criminal convictions, wondering months and years later, what the hell did I get involved in that for? Why did I do that? And meanwhile, the instigators online, and we all know who they are, they're not here, they're not in Belfast, they're not in Northern Ireland, they've no political representation here. They're a fringe minority where they do exist in this city, which, as I said, has welcomed immigrant communities for decades, probably centuries now, actually, when I think about it. So that's nothing new to us, having groups that come here to assimilate. But it's very important tonight in Belfast that if you're sitting at home watching this and your child or your teenager's you don't know where he or she is, then you got to find out, because we are seeing videos of antisocial behaviour and criminality, across the city, and it's important that it doesn't exacerbate or, increase any further.
Yeah, and I think, Carl, one of the issues around all of this is it sort of simmers just beneath the surface. And it takes an incident like this for those far-right elements that you're talking about to weaponize a moment like this.
The word weaponize is an interesting one that you use. I think that, this is what they're waiting for. It's almost like they sort of set the trap, and then the trap is fallen into. There's no doubt that the changes that immigration have brought to all communities, including in Belfast, have posed challenges, and they do pose challenges. There's no denying of that. There's a lack of funding of public services here in Northern Ireland. We have struggled with the impact of our local executive, but also, poor fiscal performance from London, both under the Tories and under Labour. So we're seeing our public services here squeezed. I was talking to people today, for example, who were residents who were, not directly affected by the attack, but, were shocked by it and feeling a bit anxious, and had tried to call their GP and couldn't get through. So that's a sign of what we're dealing with here. But that's not the fault of immigrants, and it's not the fault of people who come here. And that's where the major issue is there to be discussed and debated. And we can do that, but what people can't do is go out onto the streets and protest and break the law when they do that by setting fire to public transport infrastructure, buses, setting fire to streets. And as I've seen videos of some people, smashing doors in of people's homes.
Yes, and we're looking at these aerial images, live images of the city centre in Belfast, and we can see the emergency services, the police there. Their main focus now is to ensure that this doesn't escalate.
Yeah, and our police are very experienced in riot control, based on their expertise here in recent years and also in the past. So they do know what they're doing. They will be recording and trying to make arrests subsequently in prosecutions, and that is clear. So there were protests here last year in Ballymena, a town about 30 miles north of Belfast. And this is exactly what happened then, and people were prosecuted and charged since then. So what we're seeing tonight is not legal protest. It's not within the realms of the law to behave like this. It's got nothing to do, actually, with the immigration debate. It's got to do with criminality, thuggery, racism, and unfortunately, the situation being wound up and exacerbated by a fringe minority here and the usual suspects, and we know who they are, on social media from across Britain and the US.
Carl White, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Let's get more with Amanda Ferguson, a journalist based in Belfast. And Amanda, a statement has just been released from the Justice Minister. Just tell us what it says.
Yes, that's right. Naomi Long of the Alliance Party is Northern Ireland's Justice Minister. She referenced in her statement the fact that she spoke earlier with the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister and the PSNI Chief Constable appealing for calm. She said that there had been a weaponising had taken place, that there was no place for mass thugs to take to the streets and intimidate and disrupt and cause wanton damage. And she said it's simply disingenuous to claim that this is being carried out for the good of Northern Ireland. And again, she appealed for communities not to allow themselves to be used and abused by people with malign intent. And I think that is perhaps referencing a little bit about the online world, nationally and internationally, sort of far-right actors trying to weaponise this particular incident because of the people at the centre of it.
Yeah, Amanda, you've been out and about speaking to members of the community. What have they been telling you?
They're absolutely horrified by what's happening. You know, most people don't support this kind of activity. The police statement that's been issued in the last hour is still referring to it as sporadic disorder. We know that a number of vehicles have been set on fire, the bins have been set on fire, but there isn't widespread disorder in the normal sense of rioting at this point. But you can hear sirens going off all over the city. You know, it was very clear to me being out and about earlier that workplaces were letting people go home early, that businesses were shutting up shop, and most people are just horrified at what is unfolding in our city.
Yeah, and one of the things that the police continues to reiterate, and the authorities, is telling these demonstrators not to take matters into their own hands. That they are, they've detained the man, they've now charged him. That they are controlling the situation, and that people don't need to, take this matter into their own hands now.
Yeah, we know that a 30-year-old's due to appear in court tomorrow, charged with attempted murder and with threats to kill and so on. But what we're actually seeing on the streets is a number of things. There were people who took place in peaceful protest earlier in the evening around the political issues and issues around immigration that they feel they wanted to raise. But that's very different from the people who are being overtly racist, who are making people in fear for their safety, if they don't happen to be white people. We're seeing a lot of clips that are floating around online, all of those different advertised protests. Like, that really is a fishing sort of expedition, thinking, AI-generated images, we'll have protests in 100 different locations, and it's really just sort of shaking it down to see what actually happens. So what has happened is that there's been peaceful protests from some people. That now appears to be the peaceful proceedings over for the evening. And then what we're seeing is sort of burning barricades, burning buses, burning vehicles that are taking place. But police, in the last hour, their statement still did mention it as sporadic pockets of disorder. And essentially the police are asking anyone with influence, and that can be a wide range of actors in Northern Ireland, to desist from this sort of activity. But you also can't discount the fact that because we're into the summer months and because rioting and this sort of violent activity tends to happen maybe annually and usually in the summer months, that there is a recreational element to this. But some of the horrific sort of racist, abusive, misogynistic material that's floating around online and also in the clips that are being circulated, it's just horrific to most people's ears. And what we're seeing isn't representative of the majority majority of people of Belfast or the majority of the people of Northern Ireland or further afield. It's the same that whenever there's rioting that takes place in Dublin or in London or in Cardiff or somewhere in Scotland, that people are horrified by that. But I just think because of Northern Ireland's history and the legacy of all of the sort of conflict years that we've had, that there does seem to be a focus in this part of the world when something like this happens, because you just don't know whether it's going to be sporadic or whether it's going to result in sort of full-scale rioting. So we're not quite at that point yet, and I'm hopeful, I'm maybe travelling in hope over experience that doesn't happen.
Amanda, we're really grateful for your thoughts and analysis, and we're just going to keep you there for a minute. And I just want to bring you some images that our correspondent Conor Gillies described earlier. The moment police in armoured vehicles drove through barricades towards protesters. You can see in the distance a convoy driving towards that fire. Then the vehicle in the front pushes past the metal barricades, headed down the road, while the rest follow. Let's just bring in our police commentator, Graham Weston. And Graham, I mean, we can see the sort of escalation that took place earlier, the police driving through those barricades, just the challenges that the police currently face.
Yeah, we can see from the images on the screen now the armoured Land Rovers coming through the barricades. As has been mentioned already, Police Service Northern Ireland are very used to, sadly, serious disorder like this on the streets of Belfast. It's almost like seasonal. We're coming up to the time of the year when they tend to have serious disorder and protests like this, with barricades, with burning barricades, so that the officers, the public order trained officers, are very experienced. They're very well used to these sort of tactics where the vehicles then split and almost go in convoy and take the same route through the barricades or the burning barricades, as you can see on the screen now. So it's a normal police tactic, sadly, for them in Northern Ireland, to then reconvene and reform at the top of the street, but to drive through the barriers, past the burning, the fire that's set alight in the roadway, and get to the other end of the street.
And Graham, we saw a bus that was set alight earlier. We can see some vehicles now that are on fire. And we know bins were set on fire earlier as well. And of course, there were peaceful protests earlier in the day, and it just seems to have escalated. And there are concerns that this could further escalate through the night. I
think that's always been the concern. You saw, it would seem more people out in the streets earlier on, but peaceful protests, people walking around the streets, not the disorder and the vehicles that are being set on fire, or the number of vehicles set on fire that we're now seeing. It does seem to be escalating, as you heard from your correspondents. You can feel the tension when you're on the streets. When you're actually there, you can feel tension start to rise. That seems to be the case now. That will be the concern for the police. I think one of the images on the screen, one of the live images, shows a property now on fire as well. So that will be the concern for the police, the public order commanders, to actually get resources into those areas and start dealing with these incidents of serious disorder that's taking place. But it looks like at least one property on fire there on the image on the left.
Yeah, Graham, part of the issue here is that it's happening in different pockets of Belfast. It's not just contained to the city centre. And I was speaking to Dan, our correspondent, who was in the city centre earlier where the bus was set on fire, and he sort of said that it had almost de-escalated there. But then Conor was saying where he was, it felt incredibly tense, as though things were ramping up where he was.
I think that was always a concern, that there was, as I said, there was like the peaceful protest we saw earlier with a majority of people protesting peacefully, but there was always the possibility and the concern that maybe the younger element would use this. As a previous guest has said, this happens seasonally and regularly, annually in Belfast around this time of year. It becomes, and again they use the term, almost like a recreational event for some people. That was always the concern after last night's awful attack in the city. As part of an event they do regularly anyway, to set things on fire and escalate serious disorder. And sadly, as was almost predicted and feared, this is now what's happening.
Graham, thank you for that update. Let's bring in Amanda Ferguson, journalist based in Belfast, who is still with us. And Amanda, we're just looking at those earlier images of the police driving through the barricade. Of course, there's images of fire, bus set on fire earlier. Our commentator just now saying that he can also see the images of a that's set on fire as well.
Yes, that's right. Obviously, a metal barrier is no competition for an armoured Land Rover. So the PSNI is very used to dealing with scenarios like this. However, it should be noted that the PSNI Chief Constable repeatedly points out how under-resourced the PSNI is. I haven't heard about any calls for mutual aid, but that may be something that will come in the days to come if there is further. We know that sometimes can stop this, or an incident can stop this, or something like the World Cup happening on Thursday can stop this from happening. But it really remains to be seen how long this will continue. Hearing different pieces and snippets of information about people in homes that, and businesses that are occupied by people who are migrants that seem to be coming under some sort of attack. But a lot of the can just be mindless sporadic violence, and you can see some of the clips that are circulating online of just people shouting sort of racist chants and continuing on with what they're doing. But the emergency services in Northern Ireland are very used to dealing with scenarios like this. But it is the case that there aren't as many police officers in Northern Ireland as there should be, and budgets are stretched to the max.
Amanda, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just looking at some of those live images coming in from Belfast, and you can see the fire brigade at the scene there where a house is burning. It's set on fire. Earlier, we saw bins set alight, and a bus was burning out as well in the centre of town. We're going to keep across the images from Belfast. Anna will have more for you on the wrap coming up next.